Karoline Leavitt has emerged as a fervent voice against what she perceives as a troubling trend within the American judiciary, the rise of judicial activism. In her view, certain members of the bench are no longer content to interpret the law in a neutral and objective manner. Instead, they appear to be actively shaping policy outcomes through rulings that often stray far from constitutional intent. This behavior, she argues, goes beyond mere legal interpretation and crosses into the realm of political maneuvering, with far-reaching consequences for the democratic process and the will of the people. From Leavitt's perspective, the judiciary's role should be one of restraint, interpreting laws passed by elected representatives and ensuring that constitutional boundaries are respected. However, she has highlighted a series of decisions from various courts that she believes illustrate an abandonment of this principle. These rulings, in her view, are not grounded in objective legal standards, but rather reflect the ideological leanings of the judges issuing them. The effect is a judiciary that inserts itself into political battles, often blocking or delaying policy initiatives that were democratically mandated through elections. This perceived shift has prompted her to raise alarm about the long-term implications for governance. She sees a danger in allowing unelected judges to override the decisions of the executive or legislative branches without clear constitutional justification. When judicial power is used not as a check on unconstitutional behavior, but as a tool for ideological interference, it weakens the very framework of checks and balances that defines the American system of government. In her public addresses, she has made the case that judicial activism erodes public confidence in the rule of law, as it blurs the line between legal judgment and political preference. Leavitt's critique is not focused solely on individual decisions, but on what she sees as a growing pattern of behavior. Courts issuing sweeping injunctions against policy actions, often before full hearings are conducted, is one of the key symptoms she points to. These injunctions can have national effects, halting the implementation of programs or directives that were crafted to address pressing national issues. When such orders are issued on questionable grounds, she argues, it stifles the ability of elected leaders to fulfill their constitutional responsibilities. In this way, judicial activism not only challenges the legitimacy of certain policies, but also undermines the democratic process itself. In her view, this activism is particularly insidious because it often cloaks itself in legal rhetoric, presenting ideologically motivated decisions as neutral applications of law. This, she suggests, gives the judiciary a veneer of impartiality that makes it difficult for the public to discern the political motivations behind certain rulings. It also makes it harder to hold the judiciary accountable, as judges enjoy lifetime appointments and operate with a high degree of independence. While judicial independence is a cornerstone of a healthy democracy, Leavitt believes it must be balanced with a respect for the limits of judicial authority. When courts become de facto policymakers, they exceed their mandate and threaten the integrity of the constitutional order. Moreover, Leavitt contends that this form of judicial interference can have a chilling effect on future policymaking. If officials know that their decisions are likely to be overturned not based on legal merit but on ideological disagreement, they may hesitate to pursue bold or controversial initiatives. This dynamic, she believes, leads to governmental stagnation and a weakening of the public's faith in democratic institutions. It creates an environment where political disputes are no longer settled through elections and legislation, but through litigation and court rulings, shifting power away from voters and toward a select group of legal elites. Ultimately, her concern is rooted in the principle of democratic accountability. Policies should rise or fall based on their support among the electorate and their fidelity to constitutional principles, not based on the political inclinations of judges. The courts must remain arbiters, not actors, in the political process. Leavitt's position reflects a desire to see the judiciary return to its foundational role, interpreting laws as written and deferring to the political branches when the Constitution does not clearly dictate otherwise. Through her speeches and media appearances, she has sought to rally public awareness around this issue, encouraging citizens to recognize the difference between legitimate judicial oversight and overreach that distorts the balance of power. Karoline Leavitt has consistently drawn attention to what she describes as a systematic and deliberate effort by political operatives to engage in what is commonly referred to as judge shopping. This tactic involves seeking out specific courts or jurisdictions known to be sympathetic to a particular ideological perspective in order to file lawsuits that are more likely to produce favorable outcomes. From her perspective, this practice is not just a legal strategy, it represents a broader attempt to manipulate the judicial process for political gain and to thwart the policies enacted through democratic means. According to Leavitt, Judge shopping undermines the integrity of the legal system by transforming courts into battlegrounds where political outcomes are pursued under the guise of legal redress. When litigants bypass more neutral venues in favor of jurisdictions with a predictable ideological slant, the result is a distorted legal process. In her view, this undermines the foundational principle that justice should be impartial and that the courts should serve as fair arbiters of the law, not as instruments for advancing partisan objectives. She argues that this strategy is particularly harmful because it allows a small number of ideologically aligned judges to effectively halt or obstruct national policies that were developed through legitimate legislative or executive processes. By filing suits in courts with a track record of issuing rulings favorable to one side, activists and organizations can achieve through the judiciary what they could not accomplish through elections or legislation. This tactic, Leavitt contends, is being used not to protect constitutional principles, but to frustrate the implementation of widely supported initiatives. Leavitt has emphasized how this approach not only disrupts the policy process, but also erodes public trust in the courts. When rulings appear to follow political lines rather than legal reasoning, citizens begin to question the objectivity and fairness of the judiciary. This skepticism is compounded when similar legal issues result in wildly different decisions, depending on the court in which they are heard. The perception that judicial outcomes can be engineered through careful venue selection feeds cynicism about the legal system and diminishes respect for the rule of law. She also highlights how judge shopping contributes to a form of legal gridlock, where nationally significant policies are held hostage by regional courts. When a single district judge issues a nationwide injunction, something that has become increasingly common in high-stakes cases, it can paralyze the functioning of the executive branch. These injunctions can last months or even years pending appeal, regardless of whether higher courts ultimately overturn the lower court's ruling. In the meantime, critical policy decisions remain in limbo, and the momentum behind necessary reforms is lost. Leavitt believes that this tactic is often executed in coordination with media narratives, advocacy groups, and legal organizations that share ideological goals. She points to instances where lawsuits are filed in courts with reputations for progressive rulings, quickly followed by media campaigns that attempt to frame the court's decision as a moral imperative. This coordinated strategy, in her assessment, creates the illusion of broad-based legal consensus when, in reality, the decision may rest on a narrow and highly contested interpretation of the law. This strategy also has implications for judicial independence. Judges who become known as reliably sympathetic to particular causes may find themselves under increasing political pressure, either to continue issuing favorable rulings or to resist backlash from critics. This dynamic not only threatens the impartiality of the judiciary, but can also discourage qualified individuals from seeking judicial appointments, knowing they may be drawn into politically charged legal battles. Leavitt's concern is that, unless this practice is addressed, it will continue to embolden those who see the courts not as neutral venues for resolving disputes, but as weapons in a broader ideological war. The long-term consequences, she warns, could be severe. A judiciary perceived as politicized is less capable of serving as a legitimate check on government power, less able to protect individual rights, and more vulnerable to losing the confidence of the public. In her public remarks, Leavitt has called for reforms that would reduce the incentives and opportunities for judge shopping, including changes to venue rules and limitations on the scope of judicial injunctions. She advocates for a return to legal procedures that prioritize fairness, consistency, and constitutional fidelity over political advantage. By doing so, she hopes to restore balance to the judiciary and ensure that legal decisions reflect the law as written, not the preferences of the most strategic. During a high-stakes live television segment, Karoline Leavitt took center stage and delivered a powerful rebuttal to a set of harsh criticisms directed at a former U.S. president. In her signature no-nonsense style, she addressed the remarks, with sharp precision, targeting the broader narrative that has been perpetuated by elite figures in entertainment and media. Her message was clear. Political discourse should be grounded in facts and accountability, not emotional outbursts from celebrities removed from everyday American concerns. Leavitt opened her remarks with a firm denouncement of what she described as a desperate tactic by political opponents, turning to well-known actors and public figures to shape the narrative leading into the election. She questioned the sincerity and political relevance of these individuals, pointing out that many of them have spent decades insulated from the realities faced by the American people. According to Leavitt, elevating their voices over the lived experiences of citizens across the country reflects a concerning disconnection from the electorate. She didn't stop there. With practiced composure, Leavitt brought the conversation back to issues she claimed actually mattered to Americans: the economy, border security, public safety, and international strength. By doing so, she made it clear that her goal wasn't to simply counter celebrity rhetoric, but to redirect the conversation entirely. Her strategy was to expose what she portrayed as the superficiality of the criticism and underscore the need to focus on results, not personalities. Leavitt also framed the moment as part of a broader pattern. She argued that when political campaigns are in trouble, when their record cannot stand up to scrutiny, they often resort to spectacle. In her view, this includes bringing in famous faces to make loud, emotional statements rather than offering real solutions. She emphasized that the American people are smart enough to see through such tactics, and that they are more interested in policies that affect their paychecks and safety than in performances staged for dramatic effect. She spoke passionately about what she sees as a betrayal of public trust. Rather than confronting facts or debating ideas, Leavitt claimed, some voices prefer to demonize their political opponents in increasingly extreme terms. These attacks, she argued, are designed to instill fear and division, rather than to build consensus or promote understanding. She challenged viewers to consider whether the use of celebrity influence in this way really benefits democratic dialogue, or if it simply contributes to further polarization. In a pointed moment, she made a broader cultural critique, stating that many in Hollywood and the media elite lives vastly different from the average American, and yet frequently try to dictate political morality. This, she argued, is why the political establishment is losing credibility. People are tired, she said, of being lectured by those who are disconnected from the challenges of daily life. Rising grocery bills, crime in their neighborhoods, and a feeling of powerlessness in the face of bureaucratic overreach. Leavitt also sought to draw a line between patriotism and partisanship. She insisted that loving one's country doesn't require blindly supporting any leader, but it does mean respecting the electoral process and the legitimacy of different perspectives. She argued that those who resort to public tirades and sweeping condemnations of political figures are undermining that principle, choosing spectacle over civic responsibility. As the segment continued, Leavitt maintained her stance with confidence, rarely allowing interruptions to knock her off course. Her message was one of resilience and clarity. The administration she supports will not be distracted by theatrics. Instead, she vowed that their focus remains on restoring economic strength, ending lawlessness, and putting America first. Every attempt to paint them as authoritarian or dangerous, she suggested, is a smokescreen to avoid addressing real policy debates. What made the exchange particularly striking was her ability to flip the narrative. Rather than responding defensively, she went on offense, turning the moment into a critique not of the speaker himself, but of a system that places more value on celebrity status than civic leadership. Her choice of words was careful but cutting, drawing applause from some quarters and outrage from others. Still, her presence made it clear that she intended to set the tone and not merely respond to it. Her performance during this segment served as a snapshot of the evolving political communications landscape, where spokespeople are not just relaying information but actively shaping the battlefield. In the face of cultural icons and public opinion influencers, she stood her ground and made the case for a different kind of engagement, one rooted in policy, not performance. In a compelling and unexpected moment during a nationally televised discussion, Karoline Leavitt found herself fielding a pointed question from Representative Jasmine Crockett concerning the current administration's approach to U.S.-Canada relations. The inquiry revolved around recent threats to increase tariffs and curtail electricity cooperation between the two nations, issues with the potential to ripple across trade, energy, and diplomacy. Leavitt, maintaining a poised and assertive demeanor, seized the opportunity not just to respond, but to reshape the narrative with striking clarity and bold political framing. She began by acknowledging the seriousness of the question, but quickly pivoted to challenge assumptions underlying the critique. Rather than treating Canada as an untouchable ally, Leavitt framed the relationship in more pragmatic terms. According to her, while historical alliances are valuable, they must not be taken for granted, especially if mutual benefit begins to erode. She argued that America's responsibility is first and foremost to its own people, and that the administration will not hesitate to reevaluate even long-standing partnerships if they no longer serve national interests. What stood out was her willingness to entertain ideas that would typically be considered politically provocative. Leavitt floated the notion that Canada, while once a close partner, may now be drifting into the realm of competition. She pointed to energy pricing discrepancies, regulatory imbalances, and trade practices she claimed were increasingly unfavorable to American workers. In her view, maintaining strong borders doesn't only mean geographical security, it means drawing firm economic boundaries, even with countries historically considered allies. She went further, presenting a controversial hypothetical that Canada could, under the right circumstances, be more valuable to the United States as a formal extension, what she referred to, in passing, as the potential 51st state. This comment was less about literal annexation and more about underscoring a perceived imbalance in the current relationship. Her implication was clear. Canada reaps immense benefit from its proximity and trade with the U.S., yet does not always reciprocate in ways that reflect a truly equal partnership. Leavitt emphasized that Americans are growing increasingly skeptical of foreign policy approaches that prioritize diplomacy at the expense of domestic prosperity. She cited mounting frustrations among working-class families who feel squeezed by rising utility bills and believe that current energy exports, including those to Canada, are contributing to their financial strain. Her message was that hard questions must be asked, even if they challenge diplomatic norms. Throughout the exchange, she stayed grounded in economic language, invoking statistics on trade deficits, employment, and energy dependence. She suggested that Canada's economic health is closely tethered to U.S. cooperation, and that continued goodwill should be contingent upon fairness and mutual accountability. Rather than romanticizing the cross-border relationship, she portrayed it as a transaction, one that must be constantly renegotiated to align with American interests. She also drew parallels between Canadian and American internal politics, hinting at shared struggles with inflation, overregulation, and public dissatisfaction with leadership. By framing the two nations' issues as intertwined, she positioned the U.S. as not only a partner, but a potential leader in regional reform. Her underlying argument was that bold leadership requires a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths, and that includes the reality that friendship between nations should not come at the cost of national security or prosperity. This approach marked a significant rhetorical shift from traditional diplomatic language. Where past officials might have focused on cooperation and continuity, Leavitt leaned into a narrative of strategic reassessment. She argued that protecting American jobs and resources must come before preserving any nostalgic notions of unshakable alliance. Her stance was unapologetically transactional, aimed at appealing to voters who view global cooperation with skepticism and prioritize self-reliance. Her remarks sparked a visible reaction on the panel, with some pushing back against what they interpreted as an overly aggressive posture. Still, she remained firm, reiterating that any nation, regardless of history, must be held to account if it becomes an impediment to American success. In this way, her argument was not anti-Canada, but pro-American in the clearest possible terms. She insisted that diplomacy must be driven by data, results, and the lived realities of everyday citizens, not sentimental traditions or unexamined loyalties. In presenting this view, Leavitt redefined the boundaries of what's considered acceptable in discussions about U.S. foreign policy. She challenged the idea that close allies should be above critique and emphasized that every relationship should be evaluated through the lens of reciprocity. Her performance made clear that the administration intends to approach international dealings with eyes wide open and with a mandate from voters to put American priorities first, even when that means disrupting long-held